Last time that you took a good walk through the book of Deuteronomy. Yeah, I made the same face, Karen. Not a book of the Bible that we read all that frequently. And you know what? You probably should. There's actually some amazing stuff in the book of Deuteronomy. Some things about how we should live our life before God as a community. I remember one of my professors, Dr. Donald Luck. Gisela, don't make that face. What's the matter?
It's so dark. We don't see you. I wonder if you stand further down.
If I stand farther away?
No,
Like
it gets
this?
worse.
Yeah. Anyway, one of my professors, he would have said it was not just stuff, but it was radical stuff that's in here in the book of Deuteronomy. And even though it's the Old Testament, it really has something to say for our lives today. So most of the book is the words of Moses, giving instructions to the people of God on how to live. For example, it says, there should be no poor people living among you. None. Because you are living in a land of plenty. So, there's an implication, right? It says, therefore you should loan to anyone who asks you for a loan when you have something available. When you have it and somebody else needs it, you should loan it to them. And guess what? Not only should you loan it to them, but in the 7th year, all the debts that have been gathered up, all the things that are owed to you, in the 7th year, they are erased. You're a banker, what would you say? Written off, right? Writing off these loans. And they're done. The person who borrowed from you no longer has an obligation to pay it back. I told you this was radical stuff, right? And it goes on, it says, don't even try to be stingy. Don't look the other way and say, pretend, I can't see you, I can't hear you, you need some, no, I'm sorry. Don't even ever try to not lend to somebody money that you have and they need, because you do your calculation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, it's the 6th year. So if I loan this person something and next year is the 7th year, they won't have paid me back hardly any interest and none of the principal yet. And in the 7th year, what happens? It gets written off. Oh, no, I'm not going to make that loan. Huh? I'm not going to do it. You see, because the 6th year is not the 6th year of the loan. The 6th year is when the 6th year happens in the community, or the 7th year, I mean. And if somebody needs a loan from you in the 6th year, a year later, it's going to be written off. It's going to be forgiven. The balance is done. And the reason that you don't not loan somebody, lend somebody money, is because that person who's asking for the money to be lent to them can call out God's attention on you, because that is considered a blatant sin, to not lend when you have. And so, Natasha's wearing the shirt, and Sari was wearing the shirt, because the message of Deuteronomy, I thought Private made it up, is live generously. Be ready to give what you have. Give generously to those in need, to your neighbors who are hurting, who are in any kind of trouble. All of this is in Deuteronomy chapter 14. And I commend it to you. And if you say, you know, Pastor, it's just so hard to read, go online and get it in the Message version. It makes it a lot easier to read and to understand. And it gives you some really good instructions. It gives instructions for personal life. That is to say, personal life lived among a community. Because none of us live just unto ourselves. We all need other people. But it also gives instructions for our corporate life. It even says that if you come into a land and you decide you need a king to rule over you, okay, have a king. But tell the king this is how they should act. Not building up a war machine, not amassing a military, not piling up silver or gold, but rather, you know what the king is supposed to do? Have the scribes make a copy of this scroll. Make a copy of all the words in Deuteronomy and give that copy of the scroll to the king so that the king can meditate on it every day and be guided in their actions as a leader of a nation and learn to live in reverent obedience to God. That's chapter 15. Chapter 18, I was going to say finally, that's the chapter, Karen, that you read from today. But when I say finally, it's not really finally because there's so much more. But it's where we're at today because it tells us how to live prophetically, to speak prophetically, to act prophetically. God intends, God tells Moses, to raise up a prophet to speak to the people after Moses is gone. The prophets are all in the Old Testament, name after name after name. If you look through all those names that are so hard to pronounce, some of them not, Amos and Obadiah and Nehemiah, and anyway, all of those prophets who came after Moses. Their role is to see the future, but not like a fortune teller. Rather, they're supposed to see things as they are, but see them from God's perspective. And to speak out about things that are as they are, but are being done wrong. To see, if you will, the signs of the times, to proclaim what is right and what is wrong, and then to force action on it. It doesn't always make a prophet popular. And Jesus discovers exactly that prophetically as he comes on the scene. He goes into the synagogue, and even as he speaks, it says he teaches with authority, with confidence, not like the scribes, but with authority and confidence. And even while he does it, there are those who come out in opposition to him. Somebody's saying, Pastor, you just read that and you're saying those, but it was just one guy who came in opposition to him. Oh, really? I said those because the man was possessed by a legion. There were not just one spirit in him, but many spirits. The man that is speaking is just the voice inside of him, within him. There is an unholy alliance about powers that are inside of him, that have been internalized into him, that have overtaken him, that are tormenting him, that are causing him physical and spiritual harm, that are putting his very soul at risk. And he knows it. We need to understand that. We need to understand that the people who are sitting in the synagogue are the people with power. And just because they're in a synagogue, it's not always holy power. They are the religious elites, but yes, they are also the bankers and the property owners. They are the ones who hold sway over people who live at the bottom of the society. And it turns out that when they realize that Jesus is saying, time's up. The time has now come. The kingdom of heaven is near. Repent and change your life and believe the message that God's kingdom is now here. He's referring back to Deuteronomy, the way it's supposed to be, that we just shared. People realize that they thought they could just, let's get these two words again, they thought they could just make a prophet when really they were being called as prophets to live in a new way. And their way of life has been exposed by the gospel. What I'm afraid of for us sometimes especially for us American Christians, is that too often we are corporately part of the group that holds power. Or at the least we have been possessed by those powers, and we have allowed ourselves to be possessed. We go into work and we come home from work and we're doing everything we do just so that we can get that paycheck and make it happen and go on. We coalesce, we give in, we say nothing, we do nothing, we just, how's that song go? Live and let live. Yesterday morning, Scott Simon did an interview on Saturday Morning Edition on WLRN, or on NPR actually. He interviewed a man named Matt Black. He's a photographer. He's been working on a project called The Geography of Poverty. His pictures are in the recent Time magazine. Roger, I don't know if you still get Time magazine, but take a look for Matt Black's pictures on the Geography of Poverty. They filed the story as America from the Bottom, documenting poverty across the country, in case you want to hear it, if you get it online. And the story broke into my casual listening to the radio on Saturday morning when this photographer being interviewed said, there is a mythology in America that we like to tell ourselves that this is a land of opportunity. The fact of the matter is, the widening gap between rich and poor in this country is consigning people to a fate that is largely inescapable. He says, if you are born poor today, you are likely to die poor. And if you are born rich, he said the same thing. You are likely to die rich. He went on in his analysis. He said, you know, to me, in the end, poverty is not really an economic question. It is a question of power. Who gets their needs met? Which communities get their needs met? Which communities don't? What is it like to be there? What is it like to have your reality surrounded by certain totems of power, social power? Ask these questions. Is your street paved or not? Do the street lights work or don't they? When you go downtown, are 4 out of 5 businesses shuttered and closed because they couldn't make it? What happens to your sense of self if that's where you're living? What happens to the community's sense of self? You want to give up. I think what struck me in hearing that is that we see it, we know it, we know which corner somebody is going to stop us and have a cup in their hand with a sign saying, we'll work for food, or hungry, or homeless, or whatever their sign says. And we know what we do, right? I mean, I keep a bunch of quarters in my car, and quarter is just such a small token. But we do what we can, but we see it. We have been saved by God's grace. It has come into our lives to claim us as the children of God. But sometimes we forget how blessed we are. Or sometimes we just don't feel all that blessed. Lord, you should look at my life right now, we say. Because we are caught up in that kind of possession that Jesus and Matt Black are trying to describe. This past week, I had my last meeting with the Haiti task force of our Synod over in Sarasota. For those of you who remember Pastor Livingston, when he came here to preach a couple of years ago, he was very exciting, and he's the president of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Haiti. He was there. He came up to be part of the bishop's installation the week before, and then he makes the rounds and visits various churches. We also had a guest. Her name was Alexandra Hutchins, and she was from Food for the Poor. Now, I've never met her before, But as we began to speak, she said, I know all about you. Apparently, some group visited Food for the Poor not that long ago from this church, and they passed around the information. Karen and Jim and I, along with Don and Dottie, had been there, and so that she knew all about me. I was amazed. And then I got to hear about her and about her life's work. Her father is a Lutheran pastor, and she herself has served as a missionary. She was in Africa, and she was in some other places. And I heard about how her life and her work has touched people's lives, including in her role now that she serves with Food for the Poor. And it has something to do with education in schools, and I forget exactly what her whole title is. And I thought, that's what it means to be a prophet. Not everybody can be a missionary or work for Food for the Poor, but that we live with an awareness in our lives of God's goodness that has come to us, not simply living with a sense of, boy, am I blessed, but then out of that sense of being blessed, of receiving God's grace and mercy, that we actively work through our blessing to be a blessing to others. And I thought to myself, you know, the greatest gift that you as a congregation could give me as I prepare for a change in my life and leaving would be the gift of a legacy that says, we will live and work prophetically. And if that means our relationship with Food for the Poor gets lifted up, thanks be to God, or if it's Habitat for Humanity or a place and time. And I don't mean just bringing a box of cereal to church on Sunday morning. I mean getting involved with the people who receive it and letting our lives be changed and transformed to live in a way that says, not even just a hand out, a hand up, but something that says we're working for change so that all of God's children can receive the blessings that we know in our lives that we also have received. That we would live out the words of Jesus and the radical words of Deuteronomy. You're all going to go home and read the whole book tonight. I know it, right? Well, maybe not, but get on there. Start on it anyway. And recognize that in the midst of that, God will lift us up on eagle's wings and be our help and our strength for all our days. That would be such a gift. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.